Today, I'm going to show you how to design an item for the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Remastered rules. Hey there, goblins. My name's Robert. This is Goblin Salvage Rights, and today we're going to be cooking up some sweet items. Now, don't be worried about breaking the game's math. As long as you follow the steps and reference the tables, you should be fine. This is Paizo designer math, not goblin math. Now, at the end of this video, all you goblins are going to be able to enter your fancy new item in GSR's first ever contest. Erik and I are going to pick the winners. It's going to be awesome. Stick around to find out how to enter yours. Now, all the tools you're going to need are available on Archives of Nethys. And of course, we've linked that down in the doobly-doo below. If you've got a book at hand, you can find all of these rules in the GM core book on pages 130 to 133. Step 1. Planning your very own item. First, we need a concept and picture in mind. Decide who or what this item is for. Is it a reformed orc champion of Lamashtu? Or maybe an Abdarian banker turned rogue? Now, knowing who this item is for is going to give you some more tangible ideas to work with. Ask yourself, what's the narrative goal of this item? Is this a set piece that's supposed to show off the history or environment the item is found in? Is this an item that's going to set a player apart, creating an iconic character for your group going forward? Maybe this is a MacGuffin with a special ability the characters are going to carry around with them as a trophy, remembering the adventure they had before. Lastly, think about a picture, a physical picture that you've seen on the internet or have in your mind's eye. Pictures do a great job in informing so much about a concept. Having a specific item or shape in mind is going to lead you right into step 2. Step 2, we define the item type. By now, we should have a pretty good idea of the shape of our magical item. Is it a sword, a cape, a ring, a magical bowl that pours water out? Maybe it's a consumable potion that you can drink or something you can throw at your enemies. Whatever it is, it has a category that Paizo has defined. These are guidelines on the type of item you're trying to create. We want to find that paragraph and read it first before we get into any other steps. Now, the following is a TLDR of each of these categories. Brush through, find the one that fits your item, and continue on to step 3. Alchemical items. Now, they can be made for free every single day by alchemists, which means that they're generally on the lower end of power. Bomb. If your item's a bomb, it should do damage as well as a minor status effect. Poisons. Now, poisons are tricky. Frankly, they probably deserve their very own video. It'll be a lot easier for you to find a poison and reskin it for the appropriate level. Alchemical tools. Now, these should be interesting and distinct from any kind of magical item. This is what makes them cool. Potions. Now, potions only take one action to drink. That means if they're replicating a spell effect, they need to be a higher level than what that spell could normally cast. Oils. Now, oils are topical instead of ingested, but they're consumable items nonetheless, so be careful. Talismans. You know I have a strong opinion about talismans, but I won't get into it here. At the end of the day, they're consumable items, but they're very, very specific in their use, which kind of balances them out. Instead of making a talisman, consider making a spell heart instead. They're just like talismans, except they're not consumable. Your Johnny at the table will be very happy. A link to spell hearts are in the description below. Ammunition. Now, using ammunition always destroys it. If it has a really cool effect, you should probably add an action to activate the item before being able to shoot it. If it doesn't require an action, then it probably shouldn't do damage. And you need to specify that because the default is always doing damage as an arrow. Also, be careful of making super low level and cheap magical arrows because as you level up, the cost of them becomes so cheap and low that any high level archer might as well always be rocking magical arrows. Magic armor and weapons. Magical armor and weapons have a trade-off. If they have a specific magical ability, then you can't apply property runes to them. This is a big trade-off that you need to be mindful of as a game designer. This also gives you a bunch of design space to play in, so don't be afraid of it. And remember, it should always cost, at minimum, more than what that same item would cost with its similar fundamental property runes. That will give you a very solid floor of price and level going forward. Held items. These should normally require a manipulate action to use. Generally, this means that back-of-the-line casters and fighters are going to be using them a lot more than frontline fighters because they always have their hands full of weapons and armor to be fighting in close range. Runes. Now, these should remain as simple as possible because every time you apply one of your fancy runes, you're also competing against runes of its same level. We don't want to overcomplicate things. Scrolls. Now, scrolls set the benchmark for single-use items, as they are literally just spells in a can that explode and you're done. Shields. Sturdy shields set the high end for stats of their level. If your magic shield has an ability in addition to those stats, you need to reduce some of those stats in order to compensate for its power. Staffs, or staves, or whatever you call them. Now, these are bundles of spells in a stick that only spellcasters who have access to those spells can cast, if that makes any sense. So their level should always be 3 higher than the minimum level of a character that can cast the highest ranked spell in the staff. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense right now. Just wait until the next step. We'll get there. Structures. Now, structures are almost never used in combat, and if they are, good on your players. So you have a lot of open space to design here. Wands. Now, wands are just once per day use items in most cases. If your wand has an extra ability to it, tack on 1 or 2 levels just to be safe. Worn items. Worn items include everything from magical rings to capes to shirts to pants, you name it. These are almost always static items that give static abilities, plus maybe some other activated ability. They have the widest range of design space, in my opinion. Step 3, determine ability and consistency. Let's start with abilities. Now, the abilities of the item are literally the things it does and interacts with in the world. Generally, they fall into one of 3 categories. They replicate a spell effect, they replicate a feat effect, or they replicate a static bonus. Sometimes they're a combination of all 3, or just 2. Now, if your ability can be replicated or is similar to a spell or feat you find in a book, use that feat as a basis for the level of your item. Now, if your ability is truly unique, unlike anything you've ever seen in a book, what I want you to do is bracket it. Find an ability that's kind of similar, but less powerful, and find an ability that's similar and maybe more powerful, and find somewhere in between. In the real estate world, we call this finding comparables, and it'll be really useful for determining the appropriate level of the ability you're trying to create. Now let's talk about determining consistency. We're asking the question, how many times per day can your item be used magically? The following are some typical choices for magical items. Once per day. These are big effects that have a lasting impact on combat, or they replicate some sort of spell that a caster in the party could probably cast, or is maybe 1 spell rank away from casting. 2 or more times per day. These are typically smaller effects that don't have as much of an impact on battle as once per day effects, but are still found to be pretty useful by the party. A lot of times they'll have utility that's important to the party when it matters. Once per hour effects are more like once every 2 or 3 fight effects, depending on your table. Some tables run a lot of fights close to each other in time frame, others like to do 1 fight a day. This will actually really determine how powerful this kind of item is. The more fights you have in a day, the more powerful it's going to be. Now, once per minute effects are more like once per fight effects, as most combats don't normally last more than 1 minute at a time. Now, these can be pretty powerful effects, but they can also make that player iconic. This could be their iconic thing they do at the beginning of every fight, power up their sword, or something like that. Finally, constant abilities, ones that are always on, are almost always static abilities that go by, or they're an activated item that just keeps going and going and going. Think Decanter of Endless Water or something like that. These should typically be less powerful than any ability that stems from a class the player already has. We don't want our magical items overshadowing the actual players, after all. Remember, the more consistent your magical item can be used, the more likely your players are going to find ways to break your game world with it. Ask yourself, can they make infinite money with this? Can they just flood every dungeon instead of actually delving through them? Really think about the constant or once per minute or once per hour abilities you hand to players, because they can absolutely throw a game sideways. Step number 4, determining the item level. What we're going to want to do is set a target level for our item. This target level should be within 2 levels lower or higher than what your party is currently. This way, you don't hand them anything that's too powerful or too weak that they'll never use. Next, we're going to use some formulas I've created that are based on the recommendations in the book. These are going to set the minimum item level. For once per day items, we're going to take the spell rank, multiply it by 2, and then add 1. For items with multiple uses per day, we're going to take the spell rank, multiply it by 2, and then add 3, giving us our minimum item level. Finally, constant abilities just have a chart. We're just gonna reference the chart. Permanent magic item price. Now, if your item has multiple magical abilities, find the highest minimum level and go with that. If those abilities are close to the same minimum item level, what you're gonna wanna do is add 1 or 2 levels to the item just to be safe. Now we ask the question, is our item in the range we determined earlier? If it's not, then we can go back and maybe reduce the number of times per day it can be used, or maybe reduce the bonus it gives, or even find a similar spell effect at a lower level and replicate that instead of the spell we just chose. And if none of that works, then maybe we just need to be patient, you know? If you've got this really cool item and you don't want to sacrifice any of its abilities, and let's say it's 3 or 4 levels higher than your party, well, just keep your item the way it is. Let your party level up to that threshold 2 levels before the minimum item level, and then give it to them then. Trust me, giving your players a well-balanced item is going to be way more fun than giving your players an overpowered item and just see them cut through all of the monsters that you throw at them. Step 5 is determining the DC. Now that we have our level, everything is as easy as just referencing numbers on charts. We're going to go look at the chart called Magic Item DCs, and we're going to choose the corresponding DC for our item level. Step 6 is price. Now we compare our item level with the corresponding chart called Permanent Magic Item Price Chart, or Consumable Price Chart, to determine your price. If it's a combat item, weapons, armor, perception checks, it should be on that high end of the range. If the abilities are secondary to combat, or they have really weird niche applications, they should be on the lower end of the price range. But trust me, when in doubt, just make it the highest price for the level possible and you'll be fine. Step 7. Step 7. Finally, what we're gonna do is compare the item we just made to other items that exist. We need to double check that our item is similar in power, level, and cost to other items that have been made in the game. When in doubt, go find a similar item that's just like yours and see if it's the same price. See if it's the same level. If it's not, then bump it up, maybe bump it down. At the end of the day, it's all about comparables. Compare your item to other items and see what works. That's it. Now that you know how to design an item, do it. Just do it. Go and share your item in the comments with us and the rest of the Goblin community. In about a month or so, Erik and I will go pick our favorite and send the winner a prize. It's probably going to be a paizo item of our choice, along with like a fun tchotchke from Goblin Salvage Rights, signed by Erik and I. I'm really hoping this will be a lot of fun. I can't wait to see all the Goblin items we scrounge up on the internet. Questions, as always, will be answered in the comments as well. We try to read and reply to as many as we can. If you found this video useful, maybe check this one out. Thanks so much for watching, Goblins. Like, comment, subscribe, all the normal shit. But most importantly, as always, keep it weird.